NEC section 430.102c addresses scenarios where a disconnect is employed to grant access to equipment housed within a vault, manhole, or similar enclosure. In such instances, a warning sign is mandated to be affixed either directly onto the enclosure or in close proximity to it. This sign must be conspicuously visible to any individual performing work inside the enclosure. The prescribed wording for the sign is warning disconnect. Equipment in this enclosure will be energized when disconnect is in the on position. This implies that when a disconnect switch is in the off position, all conductors emanating from that disconnect should indeed be de-energized. Utilizing a disconnect solely as a pull box raises concerns regarding code compliance and safety. Disconnects are designed and intended to provide a means of safely isolating electrical circuits or equipment for maintenance or repair. Their primary function is not to serve as junction boxes or pull boxes. Using a disconnect in such a manner could potentially violate electrical codes and create hazardous conditions. The electrical code provides specific guidelines for the installation and use of disconnects. These guidelines are intended to ensure the safety of personnel working on or near electrical equipment. Tampering with or misusing disconnects can compromise their intended function and increase the risk of electrical shock or other injuries. Firstly, consider the intended purpose of a disconnect switch. It is designed to provide a safe and reliable means of disconnecting power to a circuit or piece of equipment. Using it as a pull box introduces the potential for damage to the switch mechanism and reduces its effectiveness as a safety device. Secondly, think about the potential for confusion and misinterpretation. If a disconnect is used as a pull box, it may not be clear to everyone that the conductors inside are still energized even when the switch is in the off position. This could lead to accidental contact with live wires and result in serious injury. Thirdly, evaluate the code compliance aspects. The electrical code specifies the types of enclosures that are permitted for use as pull boxes and junction boxes. Disconnect switches are not typically listed or approved for this purpose. Using a disconnect as a pull box may violate code requirements and could result in fines or other penalties. Fourthly, the available space and accessibility within a disconnect enclosure are often limited. This can make it difficult to properly splice and terminate conductors, and it can also hinder the ability to inspect and maintain the wiring. Fifthly, the presence of energized conductors within a disconnect enclosure that is being used as a pull box can create a hazardous working environment. Workers may be exposed to the risk of electrical shock or arc flash if they come into contact with live wires. Sixthly, consider the potential for overheating. Overcrowding a disconnect enclosure with conductors can restrict airflow and cause the wires to overheat. This can lead to insulation damage, short circuits, and even fires. Seventhly, examine the labeling requirements. Disconnect switches are typically labeled to indicate the equipment or circuit they control. If a disconnect is used as a pull box, it may be necessary to add additional labeling to clearly identify the function of the enclosure and the presence of energized conductors. Eighthly, think about the long-term maintenance considerations. Using a disconnect as a pull box can make it more difficult to maintain the wiring and equipment in the future. It may be necessary to disconnect and remove the switch in order to access the conductors inside, which can be time-consuming and disruptive. Ninthly, evaluate the alternatives. There are many other types of enclosures that are specifically designed for use as pull boxes and junction boxes. These enclosures are typically more spacious, easy to access, and better suited for splicing and terminating conductors. Tenthly, consider the safety implications. Using a disconnect as a pull box can compromise the safety of workers and increase the risk of electrical accidents. It is important to follow code requirements and use the proper equipment for the job in order to ensure a safe working environment. Therefore, using a disconnect as a pull box is generally not recommended or permitted by electrical codes. It is essential to adhere to the intended purpose of electrical components and follow proper wiring practices to maintain safety and code compliance. If additional space is needed for pulling or splicing conductors, it is advisable to install a properly sized and approved pull box or junction box. This will ensure that the wiring is protected, accessible,
and in compliance with applicable codes and standards. In Maryland, the electrical code is based on the National Electrical Code, or NEC. Therefore, the requirements and regulations outlined in the NEC apply to electrical installations and practices in Maryland. It is essential for electricians and electrical contractors in Maryland to be familiar with and adhere to the NEC to ensure safe and compliant electrical work. Failure to comply with the NEC can result in fines, penalties, and potential safety hazards. The NEC provides comprehensive guidelines for electrical wiring, equipment installation, and safety procedures. It covers a wide range of topics, including wiring methods, overcurrent protection, grounding, bonding, and equipment installation. The NEC is updated every 3 years to reflect advancements in technology and best practices in the electrical industry. It is important for electricians and electrical contractors to stay up to date with the latest edition of the NEC to ensure their work is in compliance with current standards. In addition to the NEC, Maryland may have its own state or local electrical codes and regulations. These codes may supplement or amend the NEC to address specific local conditions or concerns. It is important to check with local authorities to determine if there are any additional requirements or restrictions that apply to electrical work in a particular area. Electrical inspections are typically required for new electrical installations and renovations in Maryland. These inspections are conducted by qualified electrical inspectors to ensure that the work is in compliance with the NEC and other applicable codes. Electrical inspectors will review the wiring, equipment installation, and grounding to verify that they meet the required standards. They may also perform tests to check the functionality and safety of the electrical system. If any violations are found during an inspection, the electrician or contractor will be required to correct them before the installation can be approved. It is important to address any violations promptly to avoid delays and potential safety hazards. Electrical permits are typically required for most electrical work in Maryland. The permit application must include detailed plans and the specifications for the proposed work. The permit fee is typically based on the scope and complexity of the project. Once the permit is approved, the electrician or contractor can begin the work. It is important to post the permit at the job site and to notify the electrical inspector when the work is complete. The electrical inspector will then schedule a final inspection to verify that the work has been completed in compliance with the NEC and other applicable codes. Electrical safety is a top priority in Maryland. The state has strict regulations in place to ensure that electrical work is performed safely and in accordance with industry best practices. Electricians and electrical contractors are required to be licensed and insured to protect consumers from shoddy workmanship and potential safety hazards. Consumers should always hire a licensed and insured electrician for any electrical work in their home or business. This will ensure that the work is performed safely and in compliance with applicable codes. It is also important to obtain multiple bids from different contractors before selecting one for the job. Be sure to check the contractor's references and to verify that they have the necessary experience and qualifications. Do not hesitate to ask questions about the contractor's work practices and safety procedures. The goal is to ensure that the electrical work is done safely, correctly, and in accordance with applicable codes and regulations. Ignoring these steps could lead to potential safety hazards and costly repairs in the future. When working with electricity, it is crucial to always prioritize safety. Always disconnect the power supply before working on any electrical equipment or wiring. Use appropriate personal protective equipment such as gloves, safety glasses, and insulated tools. Never work on electrical equipment in wet or damp conditions. If you are not comfortable working with electricity, always hire a qualified electrician. Electricity can be dangerous, and it is important to take all necessary precautions to protect yourself and others from harm. The information provided regarding NEC Section 430.102c and the use of disconnects as pull boxes is intended for general guidance only and should not be considered a substitute for professional advice. Always consult with a qualified electrician or electrical engineer for specific recommendations and guidance regarding your particular situation.
The electrical code is complex and can be subject to interpretation. It is important to stay up to date with the latest edition of the NEC and to consult with local authorities to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. Using a disconnect as a pull box can have significant implications for safety, code compliance, and long-term maintenance. It is important to carefully consider all of these factors before making a decision about how to wire and install electrical equipment. In most cases, it is best to use a properly sized and approved pull box or junction box instead of a disconnect. This will ensure that the wiring is protected, accessible, and in compliance with applicable codes and standards. Remember to prioritize safety when working with electricity and to always follow the instructions and recommendations provided by qualified professionals.